Hello, I'm Pat Payton, a director at Companies in Motion.
And I'm Claire Dale, founder and also a director at Companies in Motion, and along with Pat, co-author of our book, Physical Intelligence.
We're joined today by Ash Seddeek. Ash is the Chief Excitement Officer at the Executive Greatness Institute. As a business strategist and leadership coach, he works with leaders to help them become Chief Excitement Officers, bringing joy, energy, vision, and a unique point of view to their leadership challenges. Thank you for joining us, Ash.
Absolutely, Pat. Thank you. Thank you, Claire.
It's lovely to have you here, Ash. As a consultant working with many leaders, we're going to talk about your work developing Chief Excitement Officers and having the courage to lead, as well as the role physical intelligence plays in the context of leadership and organizational culture.
Claire.
It's lovely to have you here, Ash. As a consultant working with many leaders, we're going to talk about your work developing Chief Excitement Officers and having the courage to lead, as well as the role physical intelligence plays in the context of leadership and organizational culture. Our aim with this podcast is to share best practices from your perspective and discuss how we can more effectively lead others and create physically intelligent organizations.
Wonderful, Claire. Absolutely. I think a lot of these elements come together fabulously in our joint work, the work that your organization does with clients. I was very excited when I heard about your book from Pat and the focus on physical intelligence and how that energy really drives a very important dimension. When I bring this together in the work I do, I always start with the fact that if the leader does not have the well-being and the physical fitness that is required to do the heavy lifting of being that person that everybody sort of feeds off of, the energy they bring to the table is really at the essence of what Chief Excitement Officers is all about, is the fact that leaders are in this sort of very difficult position where they are the source of energy for a lot of people around them. If they are upset, everybody can see it on their face. If they are not taking care of themselves, people can tell. If they're not taking care of the organization, people can feel it. So being a Chief Excitement Officer really comes down to being aware of how much impact each leader has just by walking around, just by speaking or not speaking, by communicating or not communicating. And that is the dilemma that leaders have, that whether they do or do not do, they are really affecting a lot of people around them. And of course, the organization and its revenue and it's the growth acceleration. And that's essentially what brings this work together.
If I were to say so, Ash, tell me, what is a Chief Excitement Officer? I want to make sure our listeners really get that crisp definition from you.
Absolutely. So a Chief Excitement Officer is someone that fundamentally brings a different point of view to the workplace. They can be, as Michael Wolff, who is a very famous British designer and brand expert, he talks about this whole idea of being very obsessively observant of their environment. Organizations look at leaders to bring something different and new to the organization, not just manage the day-to-day, but take us somewhere else. The word lead tells us that we're going somewhere, we're going from point A to point B, and for goodness sake, let's make sure it's a very good point B. And that's really where a lot of organizations, even us on an individual level, when we think about physical intelligence, we know we have at least 15% potential at a minimum if we just shift our physical exercise and our physical well-being on a daily basis. Just imagine the same thing happening in organizations. There is a 15 to 30% uplift that can happen in the business if each one of those leaders would actually sort of raise the game and raise the bar and bring more energy to the organization. So the work I do with leaders is essentially say to them, this is your imperative. You are responsible for bringing energy into the organization. And that energy is going to come from not just from the physical angle, which is absolutely critical and very foundational, but also in you looking at the organization, looking around and discovering, oh my God, imagine if we take customer service to the next level. Imagine if we take our finance organization to the next level and be that person that creates tension. That's what I call it. Leaders need to be people who create tension. And that's the beautiful type of tension, which really is more about identifying change initiatives that are going to actually create a very, very solid uplift in performance and revenue growth for the organization.
Sounds like it's creating this tension between the future and what is now. I really love that.
Exactly.
Now, I understand that this work led you to create the Courage to Lead toolkit for leaders, which just sounds amazing. Can you tell us about that? I want that toolkit.
Sure, absolutely. And it really comes down to making sure, of course, we all talk about vision, purpose, mission for the organization. We talk about strategy, but we need to also be talking about these, what I call pivotal moments that happen throughout the year for this leader. And these pivotal moments are moments where that leader goes out, let's say today on a WebEx or over a Zoom or WebEx or Microsoft Teams, whatever that collaboration tool might be, and actually speak up about what that vision is and what they see happening. But the magic is not to say it once, but it's to be repetitive message that they are always going to be talking about. So these pivotal moments then become these exponential value moments. Exponential value moments, because when they speak and impact hundreds of people, then all of a sudden hundreds of people can go out of that room saying, oh my God, I can't imagine how much better customer service is going to be, or how much better we are going to be as an organization. So the kit essentially focuses on these moments and helping leaders develop the right talking points and the right energy and the right messaging that they can deliver in each one of those moments. Because when a leader goes out and does an all hands meeting without preparing and thinking about those moments, then that's really where it's going to be a missed opportunity. So they need to be aware of that sort of year-long journey of messaging that they have to deliver, and how everyone is really counting on them to keep that message top of mind, so that it's not a one-time idea, but it's something that they're constantly talking about.
That reminds me, Ash, of John Cotter's work. He talks about the fact that 70% of change initiatives fail. Number one reason being lack of engaged leadership. Number two reason being under communication by a factor of 10. So it's something that I have observed for years and very much believe. So I think that work is wonderful, because even though he has said that for a very long time, and I think is he still with us? I'm not sure. It's a message that leaders still need to hear. So we are big believers in the importance of what you say and how frequently you're saying it. So well done. We would love to see that toolkit. We may need a sidebar after this conversation, Ash. You know, and it was interesting to me also to notice, and I've known you, Ash, for a number of years, but I hadn't known until you sent us your bio that you co-authored the book, Meaning, How Leaders Create Meaning and Clarity During Times of Crisis and Opportunity. And it was published in 2017.
Yes.
And now 2020, if ever there was a time of crisis, it's this year. So for many, if not most leaders, which lessons from that book do you believe were most relevant for leaders as they navigated this crazy 2020?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think the best lesson out of the book for the time that we're in is the fact that communication is one of those things where everybody knows it's hard work, because it's one of those things where, oh my God, we need to tell them again. It's like, yes, we need to tell them again. So the main point in the book is really to communicate, and make sure that you don't take that burden of communication on your shoulder by yourself. And I think that leaders in the book told us in several organizations that they lead, how they essentially then build a coalition of people that can actually take their message and amplify it, can take their message and make sure that it continues to resonate throughout the organization. And that's why we come back. I love your book and I love your concept of physical intelligence, because it is going to come down to how much energy do you have, and then how do you sort of expend that energy out on the different things that you have to do. And knowing that the one important dimension is going to be that whole effort behind messaging, because out of sight is out of mind. If you don't say it repetitively enough, they're going to assume, oh, now you're busy with something else, highly likely. So we can drop off the whole conversation about the customer service initiative or the finance organization digital transformation initiative. And that's why we see this in advertising happening all the time. We keep asking, why do they keep repeating the same ad? It's because human nature will actually tend to believe rather implicitly and automatically that if you're not talking about it, it's not happening anymore, it's not important anymore. And that's why at a time like this, leaders need to step into the light and have these repetitive touch points with their communities, within organizations, to continue to tell them, we are here, the company's culture is here, we are still one community, despite the fact that we are all working remotely, we are still into that construct of an organization, and we have our own brand, we have our own customers, and you continue to reiterate that messaging, because otherwise, again, people will feel so much detached because they don't see the physical artifacts they used to see, the big building with the brand name on top of it, and so on.
Now, it's fascinating. And they're also, leaders are more distracted trying to address all of these new challenges. They have new messaging around the new challenges, but that doesn't mean that business stops. In fact, we need it to go even more than ever. We might have to adjust what we do because of what's happening in the world around us, in our client base, et cetera, et cetera. But for sure, it's more challenging because of those added distractions for leaders to remember to keep repeating what they need people focusing on. And you can't just go down into the bunker and put your head together with the other leaders and strategize. You have to keep lifting your head up and saying, hey guys, I'm here and here's where we're headed and why. I can see that. And they would need that reminder, right? So what happens in an organization from a physical intelligence perspective if the leader suddenly does disappear? We know they're going off to do that hard work, to build those strategies, but what happens physically inside our bodies when that leader disappears?
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that people's energy level will go down because, again, the expectation has gone down. So if the expectation has gone down, people will tend to really gravitate to the lowest denominator. So if the level of energy they are feeling from the leader is at a 5, when it could be a 10 or a 15, then they're more likely to sort of look at that leader and try to align, because they, of course, their thinking is, I don't want to look odd in that picture. So I'm going to kind of feed off of Pat or feed off of Claire. And human beings do that all the time. They look at the leaders and try not to sort of rise above that surface level. So as much as leaders expect more of themselves, then everybody around them is going to naturally gravitate towards that level of energy and try to match it. At a minimum, try to match it. And that's really what's happening. And I think people know it when they are in a meeting and they can see the energy is very low, because the pivotal person in that meeting is not seeing themselves in that light. They are thinking that everybody should bring their own energy. But human beings look at that, sort of the leader of the herd, and say, well, let's see what she does. Let's see what he does. And then we can follow. And that's really where one of the things we talk about when we talk about Chief Excitement Officer is to remember that that's what people are looking for when you go in that room. Remember, you are playing a very important strategic role for the company, and you have that much impact.
I love what you're saying, Ash. And of course, the body is so closely linked to our energy. And if we don't have enough breath in our body, then we don't have enough breath, literally, to drive the thought out into the room with energy. So that's one thing. And then if we've gotten in the mindset that we don't want to patronize people by repeating, and we've forgotten that people need to hear this again and again, and maybe with a slightly different wording, but essentially the same words, we have to get used to repeating them, but being really present in the words at that moment, rather than feeling that we're being repetitive. We have to ignite them, excite them again, there and then. And that's a physical, emotional, and mental skill, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And that's why when I was talking to Pat, I said, it's foundational. It absolutely is foundational. Because then you can come back and say, now we can talk about vocal variety. We can talk about the message itself. We can talk about the stories. But without having that physical basis point, you don't really have that foundation, because then we need to come into, what's your psychology? Do you like this organization or not? Those are other elements that we can see. And then when we talk about the whole idea of creating tension, which is sort of being very obsessively observant on where can we take the business to the next level? That's then when it gets really juicy for the stakeholders and stockholders, because they can see, oh my God, this organization. I mean, you go in one of their meetings and my God, you can see something is happening. These people are going places rather than just sort of going with the flow of the existing operation as it stands.
There's emotional energy, isn't there? And that attracts people.
Yeah.
So that talk about energy, I mean, one of the key challenges that leaders have faced this year is their own well-being, because, you know, dealing with the levels of change that we've had to deal with can be energy draining. And then, of course, they've got this responsibility to address employee well-being as well and make sure everyone's energy is being resourced. So I know you work closely with Salesforce, which has shown, well, a very genuine, huge interest in well-being in the workplace, as have other organizations. I'm thinking about Novartis, for example. I'm wondering, in your experience, you know, how do you think the view towards well-being, that huge topic, has changed in response to the challenges of 2020?
Yeah, that's a great point, Claire. I think wonderfully amazing to see organizations like, as you said, Salesforce, Novartis, Cisco, a number of companies realize that they need to highlight not just the physical well-being, but of course, having the pandemic and its impact on people's minds and mental well-being as well became very important for organizations. And that's where I think, again, coming back to leaders essentially set that tone. They step into that light and they basically say, we know these are things that are happening for you. And we know that as part of being chief excitement officers or thinking about physical intelligence, we need to be aware that our employees in their distant homes and all the remote areas that they are working from need the attention from their leadership. And that's really where we saw a lot of teams doing more team calls, a number of weekly check-ins to make sure that people are connecting at a social human level and not necessarily talk about any work topics. So that we've seen a lot of that happen. And I think that was definitely welcome. Of course, people did at times get exhausted from the number of meetings, but I think seeing their leaders come just with a human touch, not talking about work, but really connecting, this was wonderful to see. And I think hopefully, you know, once we're back to some normalcy, people will still remember that I need to really connect with Claire as a human being versus just talk about work 100% of the time.
That's so crucial for one chemical in particular, our oxytocin. And there's been some fascinating work done by Paul Zak in a book called The Trust Factor, and where he actually analyzed the oxytocin levels in employees across, I mean, thousands and thousands of employees across many organizations all around the world. And his work found that trust, and oxytocin, by the way, is our social bonding and trust chemical, right? So he found that trust and purpose reinforce each other. And they create a mechanism for these high oxytocin levels over a longer period of time. And when you have high oxytocin, here's what happens. 70%, in fact, 76% more engagement, 106% more energy. You're talking about energy, Ash. These companies need some oxytocin, and that'll really fuel that energy. 50% more productivity, 29% more satisfaction with their lives. So the personal and the work impact, 13% fewer sick days, and 40% fewer cases of burnout. So in my mind, oxytocin is this supercharged chemical for not just well-being, but also business outcomes. And in our experience, we see even the most robust responses to well-being, whether it's Salesforce or Novartis or Cisco or Google, they're generally served up like a set of choices. I call it a well-being smorgasbord, but they're not necessarily guided through which of these options to choose. And the offering and the uptake isn't measured. So even in the best, and certainly at the other end of the spectrum, people are just kind of ticking the wellness box with, you know, gym membership back in the day.
Yeah.
So what degree do you think executives consider how well-being, if implemented effectively, impacts their business outcomes? Or are they still mired in that old way of thinking that it's just something that we need to do to keep our employees happy to be with us as an expectation? Not understanding that oxytocin story, and there are many other chemical stories beyond.
Yeah, I think it's probably a mix of experiences now, given the fact that a lot of things people did not have to think about. You know, some of the others, they were saying BC for before COVID. So hopefully AC is going to actually bring leaders that, you know, having gone through that experience, they now realize, oh my God, if we just pay attention to that, if we pay attention to the energy, the physical and mental well-being of our employees, our own physical and mental well-being as well, being present, being mindful, being aware, I think the uplift, as you were mentioning, these percentages to the business are phenomenal, because a lot of companies are going through a 12-month period where they're trying to achieve certain profitability. And at the very end, after everything's said and done, they have 4% margin. They are barely making a living as an organization that is probably maybe a multi-million-dollar business. So when they look at these dimensions and then they realize, oh my God, we can actually have a much better profitability level if we're able to actually benefit from those other dynamics without having to buy assets, without having to invest in the business even more. That's really getting the juice out of the existing assets would be phenomenal.
Yeah. You're talking our language, really. And I mean, I find it so interesting that the chemistry that we've been prioritizing, I guess, for many years has been out of balance slightly. So we've been really firing more on dopamine driven by high cortisol. Now, dopamine gets a bad name for addiction and those kind of things, and it's extremely important for motivation. So I'm not damning dopamine, but if you over focus on that capacity and then cortisol, the threat chemical, rises, and let's say you have quite high testosterone, so you're ambitious and you really want to go out there and kill it, then you get into the chemistry of greed and just, you know, not seeing the whole picture and giving back as much as you're taking. So then if you can switch to the oxytocinergic, the oxytocin factor, and bring in more of what Paul Zach's saying, then you get this better balance, I think, of business, of life, of well-being. And I guess that's one important thrust of the chemistry that we want to try and bring out in the biggest picture sense to businesses, that we're not going to gain, well, profit's really important and we need to serve stakeholders, and we, you know, no one's going to say don't make money.
Yes.
But it's actually the richness of that process needs to serve everyone. And we know this intellectually, but we're still not, well, many of us know it intellectually, not everyone, but we're still operating in a slightly dopaminergic, outdated mode. But we'll change. I have great faith. I think we'll have to change.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as you're speaking about it, I'm thinking that when you think about this whole idea, when we are hopeful, when we are optimistic, when we have that point of view that things are going to get better, that drives a whole different energy in the organization. And that's why, as part of that Chief Excitement Officer philosophy, is the thinking that you're really coming to the table, you're not up in the sky talking about excitement and energy without paying attention to risks involved. Of course, we're going to have to balance our view. But to your point, Claire, I think balancing the drive, the source of drive, it's not just about profitability, but it's about that very balanced picture at the very end of taking care of our people, taking care of customers, the communities that we live in. It's a phenomenal picture. And I think some companies realize that and have invested so much in really driving that, you know, employer of choice point of view. And a lot of the new generations, they are looking at that holistic picture. So that's a great point you're making.
Yeah. So in your leadership consulting work, what do you personally advise organizations to do, you know, with regard to well-being? What do you think the approach needs to be to get that right?
Very selfishly, the important piece I try to get across is this whole idea of excitement. And then we have to come back and say, well, what are we really talking about? And it's all about really looking for hope and optimism in the future. And then, as one executive at GE said, you have to travel to that future, however far it is, and stand there on the top of that mountain and look at the view. Look at the pasture and the beauty of the environment and the sun rising and the birds singing and how beautiful it's going to be for the customers, for the employees. And for the communities that we live in, because we're going to actually pay more taxes and give them more money to spend on roads and healthcare. And then come back with that excitement and just kind of capture that excitement on your face. And then keep it on a daily basis as you walk across the organization, as you get into these WebExes and Zooms conversations, and keep reminding everybody how amazing it's going to be. Because then that gives us the basis for saying, I know it's hard, and I know we've gone through this before, and I know it must be very tough right now, and I'm not trying to exclude that from our view. I'm trying to honor it and acknowledge it. But I'm also going to remind you of how beautiful it's going to be when we come together, when we build on that energy and we try to achieve that future. Then we have a daily source of excitement and source of hope and source of optimism. Because otherwise, I think if we dwell on what's going on right now, it is going to be very, very depressing. And I think human beings naturally traveling to the future all the time. I mean, I love the Eastern focus on mindfulness, which is sort of bringing you in the present. But sometimes we just want to travel to the future because we're done with this. You know, we need to see what tomorrow is actually going to bring. And we need to give people that hope and excitement, because then we are able to actually give them that on a daily basis. Because otherwise, they're actually going to seek it out somehow. You're going to look for it somewhere else if we are not able to step into that void and say, we know how it is right now, but we are here. We are here to lift you up, and we want you to lift us up, and we want this to be a joint effort in really believing that tomorrow is going to be much better than today.
What would be fascinating, Ash, because that's visualization, right? The power of visualization, which is so key for endurance. And we're all right now in what we at Companies in Motion would call an endurance tunnel, where you need that extreme effort over a sustained period of time, and you need patience and persistence and planning. And to get through that tunnel, to keep those walls firm and keep that light at the end switched on, visualization is one of the key resources. So it's wonderful that the leaders are having that GE story is perfect example of the power of visualization. If you can bring that back, not just to the leaders, but bring it back and have everyone in the organization take that journey along the path from where we are today to that future where we're looking out over the pasture and all of the positives going forward, then everyone has a piece of that. They own a piece of that vision, rather than it just being the leader's vision, and setting those milestones collectively. And there are, I don't want to get too much into physical intelligence, but there are techniques that talk about that if we actually firm our muscles as we imagine achieving that vision, they're much more likely to happen. There's neuroscience behind that, which is interesting to me, because it's an instinctive move, firming the muscles and saying to yourself, come on, I can do this, we can do this. There's actually science behind the fact that that will help you achieve it. And then celebrating all of those interim wins on the way to the top of the mountain that GE execs saw. It's wonderful that the execs are doing it. We would encourage those execs to bring that back down and have everyone go through that exercise. Now everyone is motivated and driven forward. So yeah, that executive just painted a perfect picture of what we hope everyone in all of these organizations that are feeling the pressure are engaged in doing. Just quickly, along with visualization, determination, that muscle firming helps us with determination, motivation, and appreciation, which we all know we're supposed to do, right? Yeah. Especially when we're under stress, is one of the first things we forget. To keep remembering to share and show appreciation, because that's enormously motivating. Ash, I know that you personally have had the opportunity to read Physical Intelligence. How has that impacted your own life and your own work?
I love the book because it elevates the importance of really thinking about that physical intelligence piece and taking care of one's health and the well-being. And as I was looking at it and thinking about working with leaders and talking to them about being chief excitement officers, it reminds me personally that, and I notice it when I don't do the part about taking care of my own health and my physical well-being, I cannot bring the same level of energy. And it's like, you notice when you have an off day or you're not bringing enough energy, you're not excited to go into those meetings and you're not excited to pursue certain activities. So I think definitely remembering that and elevating the importance of it individually and in organizations, you can see what the benefit is going to be, because when you bring that uplift in energy, then the chemicals are right aligned with what you want to achieve and how you want to energize others. You know, as I've always remember a quotation that says, if it's to be, it's up to me. So I have to start with me first. And I think, you know, as leaders listen to our conversation, we want them to walk away thinking that I have to start with it myself. I need to bring that energy myself, just given how much impact I have, each one of them has on their teams and organizations. It's happening whether we recognize it or not, it's there. And I think the conversation and your book, I think, is a fantastic read for people to really understand the importance of what that physical intelligence is going to do for them and their organizations.
It strikes me as well, Ash, that the two books really dovetail really well at that point of energy and where that comes from. I'm really enjoying this conversation.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering if we can turn and have a look at, well, in terms of your work, how do you see your work being impacted by, or maybe even evolving in this current environment? You know, we're talking about the pandemic.
Yeah.
How's it evolving?
I think it raised the awareness level around how important energy is. And of course, at a time like this, people are not so much tuned to talking about what the future holds, because there's just so much happening that's overpowering sometimes. And I think that's really where leaders need to step in and not necessarily, again, ignore all the risks and ignore all the obstacles that exist. But to your point, recognize them, and as Pat said, celebrate also some of the things that have happened, the stuff that's happening that we are grateful for, and recognize people for all the efforts that they are doing. Then they see that as a leader, you're really speaking to them with all of that in mind. You are not completely, you know, just having your head into what that future is, but you're also grounded in the present moment, and you realize what's happening, and you're with them as they go through the struggle. So it really kind of brought the importance of the fact that if you are in a leadership position, goodness gracious, we are going to expect you to bring that energy, despite the amazing difficulty that we're living in. Those who have been blessed and chosen now to be in these leadership positions are called upon to remember that if they can just bring 5% more energy to the room, God bless them. Everybody in that room will walk away saying, thank goodness, you know, because otherwise we feel like, who's going to bring it? And it's natural tendency. I think we all have friends where, you know, you throw a party and you're wondering, how come they never do the same? And I think it's just natural. There are some people, right, who have that blessing in them, who say, you know what, forget about it. I don't care whether they throw a party or not. I'm going to throw one myself. Because at the end of the day, it's all about chemicals and energy and emotions. And I want to enjoy and bring that energy. And when you do, when you are obsessively selfish, it actually is a positive thing, because it's going to create that energy in you and in others as well.
We agree. And we throw lots of parties, and you can come to every single one. So we wish we could throw the kind of parties we used to, but we'll get there, right? We have that vision. So imagining that future moment in time, what would an organization led by a chief excitement officer, right, who has that courage to lead, as well as an organization that has embraced physical intelligence, right? So we have a chief excitement officer at the helm. That organization has embraced physical intelligence. What do you think has to happen in order for us to get there?
I think what has to happen is definitely someone at the top of the organization, as you said, believing in that amazing mix of energy and excitement about a much more positive future, and embodying that in their everyday conversations, and embodying that in how their direct reports are taking that message and amplifying it. And I think the potential that you talked about, the percentages that you mentioned, as well as what I've seen others, the former CEO of Honeywell, talking about, you're looking at 30 to 40% uplift across the board. And I think a lot of people could resign to the environment we're in. And we know, and we have seen so many companies, despite everything, are thriving. And that's really where leaders will then look at that and say, we need to choose to be among those who thrive. And then we come back and say, even if we have to pivot into different markets or different businesses, that energy that we have, once we build it up among ourselves and among others, it really gives us the ammunition we need to do so.
We're certainly doing our part, you and Claire and I, to get that word out. It just sometimes feels like we're working extra hard to share a message that to us seems so obvious and not that difficult. As you said, we're just getting more juice out of the resources we have by supporting them in a different way. So as I often say, don't confuse simple with unimportant. You just have to have that awareness that this matters, not just because we want to be an employer of choice. It matters because it drives the business outcomes. I feel like a broken record on that point, but we're happy that you're in the fight with us, Ash.
Absolutely, absolutely. And every leader listening to us, I think once they pick up that dimension of understanding the importance of energy and what it does for them and their organizations, I think it's a straight line to uplift in revenue and performance for them.
And I think it's important to say on that topic of energy, if leaders are listening, we're not talking here about becoming a raving extrovert all of a sudden overnight. Every human being has their own particular energy. And it's using more of that wisely, being more of yourself, showing more of yourself that I think we're talking about here, and drawing on your resources. So I just wanted to clarify that, because when we got to that partying bit, the three of us are probably on the side of extroversion, and we work an awful lot with people who would consider themselves more on the side of introversion than extroversion, and how incredibly important it is that the wisdom in voices that may not necessarily push them forward the first time, but they get heard, and that wisdom and the great thinking is not lost. So we have projects that are very dear to our heart about that as well. And I think it's important to say that.
Yeah, totally. And enroll others. Just don't look at yourself as a leader, as the only person. Just build a coalition of people that can help you amplify that energy and message. Definitely. Yes, definitely.
So one final area to look at very briefly is sort of thinking about, we're contributing to global re-education essentially. And I think we're all connecting, especially in physical intelligence, the physical, the mental and the emotional aspects of being a human being are intrinsically linked. They're not separate. Every thought is a chemical and it has an emotional charge. That's just the way we are built, much as we'd like, historically, we've tried to sort of separate the mind from the body. We are absolutely intrinsically linked. So what impact can and should we hope that this has on the evolution of humanity? Let's go really large.
Oh my goodness. Can you just imagine what it would be like if one company that's only donating, let's say they are donating, they are donating 100 million to, homelessness or cancer research or, pandemic research. If that company were able to donate 200 million, 300 million, only because they've been able to activate the existing talent and resources they already have. The thousands of employees that they have that are barely engaged. We've looked at the engagement numbers and they are horrendous. The fact that employees do not see the connection between what they do and what the organization wants to achieve. And that's really where your work and the work on Chief Excitement Officers ties this whole issue together, because then we're really saying to these leaders, you need to excite people more. You need to inspire them more. You need to bring them on board with what you're trying to go and achieve more. And with that, engagement goes up, profitability goes up, the ability to impact the world positively goes up. It is just unbelievable how much power is right now resident in these organizations, and waiting for the leaders who would really believe in your message and the message around Chief Excitement Officers and bring that to the front. It's just unbelievable.
Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation with you, Ash. We appreciate that we have like minds here, and the journey from the importance of the Chief Excitement Officer with the courage to lead, to boost that energy, to inspire hope and optimism to support people, and to do that in a way that we get more juice for the squeeze, without having to invest more resources. And not only helping the leaders and the employees at a personal level, but driving those business outcomes by doing something as simple as managing your energy and the energy of the people across your organization, supporting energy and overall physical intelligence through a different approach to well-being. So again, let's not confuse simple with unimportant. What we're talking about may on the surface sound simple. It's vitally important, not just for our success as individuals and as an organization, but we just talked about the impact it can have on society, which is significant. Where can people read more about your work and reach you?
I think a straight shot would be to go to executivegreatness.com or email me at ash@executivegreatness.com. I would be happy to share with them more about the Courage to Lead program, some of the ideas we have around chief excitement officers, and we'll definitely be more than happy to connect with them that way.
Thank you, Ash. What a pleasure it's been to have you speak with us, and I'm feeling much more energized myself as a result of this conversation.
So grateful to you and to Claire. Thank you so much. Hope you have a fantastic day ahead.
Thank you so much, Ash.
Thank you, Claire. Pleasure. Cheers.
I'm a tween. I'm a tween. I'm a tween.
Okay,
I'm a tween.
hang on.
Yeah. You know, I can do it for you.